Hi, welcome to this webinar on local innovation systems related to waste and end-of-life fishing gear. This webinar is delivered via the Blue Circular Economy project, which is a European-funded Interreg project under the Northern Periphery or covering the Northern Periphery area. The project is a 3-year project, and the end of March will be the completion of the project, where we will have an overall conference, which please let us know if you want more information on that. So as I said, we'll focus today on local innovation systems, and this is particularly based on 2 workshops we organised in Galway in Ireland and in Ålesund in Norway. So you know, fishing gear is a complicated set of equipment covering both sort of finfish and shellfish, both in the open sea and in the sort of aquaculture. There are generally 3, but also more types of polymers used. So we got polypropylene, polyethylene, and nylon. But there are all sorts of other materials used: metals, corks, etc., etc. So, and what we know is that a lot of fishing gear is landfilled or incinerated, or a proportion goes into the sea, but what is still very unclear is the absolute portion of that. Some studies have indicated it may be 10% of overall marine plastics, or by weight it may be 70%. So we're really unclear. But one thing for certain is that fishing gear does end up in the ocean for a variety of reasons. And what we see is recycling is still pretty immature. There's really only 2 major players at the moment: Aquafil using chemical recycling, and Plastics Global using mechanical recycling. And the outputs of mechanical recycling processes to go into pellets that end up in products. And the Aquafil process produces a fibre that's going in a variety of other types of products. There are new entrants moving into the sector, but still that recycling infrastructure is still pretty immature. So this is the sort of iconic Bce skateboard that was produced using injection molding of pellets from fishing gear. But indeed, interestingly, with Bce's recent positions itself more as a materials supplier now, where they're not directly supplying the products they did in the past. So they've built up a lot of knowledge around the processing. They're getting increasing demand for the pellets, etc. So they've repositioned themselves. There are still not that many products that are commercially on the market produced purely from either fibers or the pellets. There's some element of concern over greenwashing going on. But we are seeing an uptick in material being used. But sometimes that's mixed with other ocean marine plastic, and it's quite difficult to extract what proportion of the claimed polymers are from fishing nets or other types of ocean marine plastics. We will complete a review of products that we will announce before the end of the project, that builds on a study we did on 2018. What I should also say is a much more detailed review of the issues arising in this presentation. A 70-page report will be published at the end of the project. So as I mentioned, we did a couple of workshops in 2019 to 20, where we brought stakeholders together in Ålesund in Norway and Galway in Ireland. And really the idea of the workshop was to bring different stakeholders together to discuss a lot of issues around ocean, marine, or rather specifically waste and end-of-life fishing gear, and also to present this idea of an innovation lab that might facilitate and catalyze some development in this area. So effectively, what we found from our previous research is in those port city areas, harbour city areas, that often those in the business system or the innovation systems, those stakeholders in, a part of the system, were separate from those in the fishing system. So the idea was to bring those two groups together. And one of the key findings, sort of slightly unsurprisingly from our point of view, that what people valued is the bringing together of different groups, because many people had never met each other. They're very much, separated, particularly from the fishing system. So we brought these different people together for networking using a series of presentations and for a series of workshop processes. And some of the generic findings we had from both workshops that again are detailed in the report is that we found at present there is this sort of fragmented policy approach related to waste and end-of-life fishing gear. And that may be even true at a sort of regional level within countries. So very fragmented, also, a fragmented approach to sort of waste management. And as many of us know, there is legislation that has been passed that will come into force in the end of December 2024, the extended producer responsibility laws for fishing gear within the Single-Use Plastics Directive. And this will place responsibilities on the fishing gear producers and assemblers, and also those that place the product on the market. And there will be responsibilities also for government. At present, there's various information collection approaches going on in relation to the gear being placed on the market and the waste gear, and there will need to be some sort of reporting going on. There's also new standards development happening within CEN, the European Standards Body, TC 466, and this is a series of 7 sub-clauses in terms of standardization that are focusing particularly around recyclability of gear, circular business models and circular design. And that process has now started. There are chairs in place and text has started to be written. So I suggest if you're interested in that, you go back to your national standards body who may connect you into that. What we also found in those workshops at that stage, and this is a couple of years ago now, is that there was a lack of awareness of the legislation by sort of even key people like harbour managers. And there's a real need to ensure that good, clear information goes out to the different stakeholders in the process. And the stakeholders in this the issues around waste and end-of-life fishing gear are in many ways broader than you had in other areas that are covered by extended producer responsibility, such as electronics, packaging and automotive. And there are some sort of particular issues around this area compared to the previous types of legislation, and that sort of notably that the networks are less involved in this system. There are a lack of organised producer networks that I'll come on to that really covered these sort of issues, and that the end-of-life and waste sort of fishing gear element is much more concentrated in particular locations around coastal areas. With electronics, packaging and automotive, a lot of those issues with the product can come to the sort of end of life, if you like, anywhere in a country, but there's very much place-based issues here. So there's a need for this better quality information that the participants reported back. You know, when's the legislation coming in? What are the responsibilities? What do we have to do? So the key stakeholders engaged in that process need to be more proactive, it was felt by stakeholders, in getting clarity of information out. There was also this sort of lack of data about fishing gear, you know, entering the market, if you like, and also the end of life and waste gear. And indeed, there is a lot of data collection going on at the moment, but this is still a very complex exercise because it's not really being done at any scale. There was a feeling that the actual absolute volume at any moment in time of waste and end-of-life fishing gear was not thought to be very significant. Now, this has issues much more broadly, you know, in terms of the recycling. You know, maybe it's to enable a critical mass for recycling, there will need to be these sort of regional hubs set up in coastal areas which may have multiple ports or harbours. So there's a lack of producer organisations. As I said, in other sectors where EPR has come in, we've had producer organisations that may have had environmental committees where information was shared. What we've seen at a national level is there is, we found no national producer or assembler organisation. So this is a concern, I think, from multiple perspectives. Fragmented approaches, lack of clarity over disseminating information from national governments to producers. So, and the Eurocord, the trade association covering this issue, really covers not just fishing nets and gear, it covers a broader set of nets for other purposes. So there's a real need for cooperation and collaboration and dialogue. So stakeholders really do need to be engaged at a port city level, and we saw this through our stakeholder workshop. So we would be suggesting that not just national stakeholder meetings are set up, but also maybe, you know, in larger port city areas or regional areas, there are stakeholder meetings that are set up where different stakeholders from the business, innovation, and you know, fishing subsystems come together. So it's a real need for that dialogue, and a need for cooperation. You know, how can the different groups get together? You know, to look at the whole value chain associated with waste and end-of-life fishing gear. So to enable some of the targets to be hit that may come into the future, or that will come into the future, there's going to need to be better cooperation. And also there was a feeling coming out of the workshops that some stakeholders in the process may have had quite sort of fixed roles in the past. They were dealing with just very specific areas, but maybe their roles and responsibilities may need to change and broaden. So you know, harbour authorities and harbour masters maybe have had a fixed set of issues where some of the issues associated with the recycling of fishing gear, or maybe reuse and repair, have not really been part of that. But maybe you know, those roles will need to be changed, and it emerged that other roles within the system, it was felt, might need to be changed as well. So as I highlighted at the beginning, there is a very immature recycling infrastructure for waste fishing gear and nets at the moment, in Europe particularly, but also globally, and you know, both on the mechanical recycling and chemical recycling. We are seeing new entrants emerging, but the value chains are also quite immature in terms of, there are gaps in these value chains that will need to be filled by, notionally the 1st of January 2025, if we're going to have infrastructure that will be able to take back and recycle the nets and broader gear. There's also an issue that has emerged quite strongly in this project, in our previous project, around contaminated gear and the need for a better classification and clarity over what can be used and what can't be used. And indeed, what we also found, and it's documented in the report, that some of the recyclers now are able to take contaminated gear, contaminated by sand or biofoulants or bioaccumulated material, and processes are developing to be able to take new materials, but it's still a big issue, and there are these issues, particularly in agriculture, with greases that are used to keep away lice, and there's a need to have processes to remove these greases and other antifoulants to get to the good quality material. So that whole issue of contamination is an issue. There was also a sort of observation and thought, for those that wanted to really become quite proactive in the area, the opportunity to set up sort of materials banks, banks of stored materials, waste fishing gear that might be utilized. At the moment, what we've observed and heard is there are often, because of these lack of cost-effective or even cost-effective waste management routes, there's often piles of nets just sort of there in various port harbour areas or port city harbour areas, and there may be ways to much more effectively deal with that legacy waste. So there's sort of the issue of, could we develop materials banks that that could be used as an input into other systems, but B, how we deal with those legacy issues. There are issues also that emerged in relation to demand and supply and market prices. We heard that various port city areas and recyclers may actually sit on some of their materials until the price is right, sort of linked to the oil price. But also the other key issue is for products utilizing pellets or filament, that there is a need obviously for customers and market demand. So, for example, what role could local government procurers play in setting a market for construction products made from that utilizing, for example, pellets into construction products? Supply chains are a big issue, particularly for the polymers, where a lot of those polymers are produced outside of Europe and imported. And therefore, if we're looking more proactively into the future in relation to sustainable or more specifically circular design of fishing gear, how are we going to communicate with our procurers over these issues? Circular design emerging, as we said, there and within the TC 466, that is looking to provide guidance standards. And this is a very new issue for the sector. There are various technical requirements associated with gear, fishing gear development and design, but environmental issues are new, and therefore at present in our research we've not found any gear developers or assemblers or producers assemblers that are incorporating eco-design or more specifically circular design into their design and development processes. So for example, nets designed for modularity and repairability, proactively designed, we've not found. We're interested. If anybody has any cases on that, please let us know. Why is this important? Well, 80% of a product's environmental impact is determined at the design stage. So if you're not thinking about it, then you're embedding some problems. What we see, however, is extensive repair activities that go on by the fishers, the customers, because they want to sort of sweat their assets. Now, if the gear designers, developers, perhaps liaise with the fishers, they may come up with a sort of more efficient system to help and support the repairers with the repairability of the nets, and that may also help at the end of life in terms of disassembly of nets. So part of what we've looked at within the project is this idea of what we call the BCE Lab, and this is an innovation lab that really sits in local communities, port city areas, harbour areas, that aims to develop products or materials from the waste or end-of-life fishing gear. And this sits within the idea that in any port, city, harbour area, or area where gear, fishing gear is used, there is a sort of local innovation system that includes businesses, higher education, local authorities, etc., etc. And the idea is, how could such an innovation lab dealing with waste fishing gear and end-of-life fishing gear cooperate within that local innovation system, and perhaps become a focus within that locality to transform in effect, the gear to pellets, to fibres, to even filament, into products that may be sold and support jobs. So again, the idea is to bring together the innovation systems, the people in the innovation systems with the fishing gear systems. And that networking then can bring different levels of expertise. And as I mentioned, within the two workshops, we tested this idea in Galway and Alicent through a series of processes to really get feedback from a diverse set of stakeholders. So again, or not again, just to clarify, the idea of the BCE Lab, this innovation lab, is a physical space. It's not a lab in the sense of a technical lab, it's a lab to facilitate innovation. And really, it looks to align itself with the whole value chain associated with waste and end-of-life fishing gear, from collecting the nets right through to the market. And the idea within the lab is there are 4 different modules or components. There's a design lab that really its role is about coming up with the ideas, facilitating innovative thinking to do with products for the waste fishing gear. There's a processing lab that processes the fishing gear into pellets or fibres or filament. And there is a manufacturing and assembly lab that will either produce the products or will assemble the products if it's a reuse type of product. And then there is a startup lab that really is closer to a sort of incubator, that's really a place where businesses can sort of effectively start up. And again, the idea of the BCE Lab, it sits within that local eco-innovation system. So part of this is then how the lab can coordinate with other people or other businesses and stakeholders in the system. And the idea is it may be one physical space that includes all those elements. So it might be a building with 4 rooms, metaphorically, or it may be for the elements may be located in and aligned to 4 existing organizations. So it's a very flexible model. There may be better, some organizations may want to host part of, one of the components, or again, there may be spare capacity that might suit a processing lab in a port, for example, or for the design lab, maybe in a university, for example. So it's a very flexible model. So it may be concentrated or dispersed, and maybe working with existing players or as an entity in itself. So very much we got a green light for further development for both workshops. Participants thought it was an interesting idea. One of the things that did emerge, however, is the idea of the BCE Lab as an innovation lab might not be the right branding. So it might be a BCE hub or a BCE innovation hub, particularly aligned to the idea that there may need to be sort of regional entities because of this potential lack of volume of materials. And this hub idea aligns with some experience from case studies that we also undertook in Canada and also in Sweden that I'll highlight a little bit later. So maybe it's a hub or innovation hub rather than an innovation lab as such, or just a lab. There was a clear feeling that there would need to be a strong leader for this, somebody who is well aligned and known in the Port City area, who has links to the fishing community and the innovation systems. Because one thing that's come out very clearly, unless the fishers are engaged with such initiatives, it may be difficult to progress things. And indeed, the success in Sweden and Canada is very much aligned to that. So there'll need to be good, strong coordination amongst different stakeholders in the community, Port City area. So there need to be the ability to bring together different parts and stakeholders in the system and skills to do that. The other area that was seen as an important area is how one further develops this idea and whether one aligns it much more to this hub idea and the idea of that I'll touch a little bit later, of primary and secondary hubs, where such an innovation lab might be termed to be a primary hub, particularly to store and maybe process the material in the processing lab, where there may be other regional initiatives that feed in with material. So the development of the lab was thought to need further work. Also, the physical location and positioning of the lab was another issue, going back to this point about who would host the different components of the lab, the design, the processing, the manufacturing, the startup, whether it would be better to align it with existing organizations, whether it's better in one place, what could be done online, what would need to be done physically, could the design lab be online, whereas the manufacturing obviously physical. It was clarified that this idea of the lab was, this is not positioned as the only solution to the problem. This is part of the solution, and there are different role players in this whole area. As highlighted before, there's likely to be, but this is still being documented because it is not really clear at the moment. There may be relatively small volumes of materials, so coming in either through the primary hub or the secondary hubs, and perhaps there may also be some discussion about expanding the sourcing to maybe agricultural netting as well, dependent on the location of the lab. The R&D was also discussed, and one area that emerged in Ireland was this potential for maybe parts of the different components of the labs being developed in different institutions and being funded by different institutions. But then the issue would be how that would be coordinated. I mean, this may allow the funding to start and initiate this, but there would be a need for, coordination. And of course, one of the issues will be how one funds this. Does one start potentially with some regional development or local government funding? But the issue is then how we develop the financial modelling and the revenue streams. Would there be opportunities for income for the lab organisers? And again, that is a question: who would be the organisers and metaphorical owners of the lab? And there is the structure of a decision over the legal entity of this. Will it be a social enterprise? Will it aim to be a profitable business in the future that makes money through selling the products that emerge from the startup companies, where a proportion of that money maybe goes back into the lab development? Maybe there's space rental. So there's a lot of work still to be done, both on the funding to start this off, also longer term funding, but also potential income streams. And again, there may be other boxes that such a lab may tick in terms of local employment and tackling sort of ocean pollution issues that is becoming particularly an issue within the European Union. So again, we found in Sotenäs in Sweden, this is an excellent case study of a local authority who've really embedded industrial symbiosis into their whole approach, and particularly have focused on marine recycling of end-of-life and fishing gear, and have structured a whole approach to do this, that also have set up a test lab to test and develop products. The Stephenson Harbour case study, again, was very interesting in that was really highlighted a lot of the logistical issues with setting up primary and secondary hubs. So very broad lessons emerging from the two case studies are: one needs a clear vision about what one's trying to achieve around the recycling or product development associated with waste and end-of-life fishing gear. So one needs a clear vision, and the fishers need to buy into this as well as other stakeholders in the local system. There needs to be, this cooperation and buy-in, as I mentioned there, from the different stakeholders. The fishers cannot pay for any element of this, or else they will not engage in it. There are, the key elements of the legislation that will be emerging in Europe is that the responsibility is placed on the producers and the assemblers of the gear, and the fishers won't have to, pay in that process. But the fishers are key parts of this, need to be engaged, and already have a lot of knowledge over repair and the end-of-life disassembly issues, but perhaps that hasn't been brought into the design and development process. There's a need to think commercially, and maybe this Stephenson example, basically in setting up their scheme, they initially worked with Aquafil to supply pellets overseas. So they got their first customer that really helped to drive the system. So the key element will be as well as setting it up and prototyping, etc., is to develop these commercial customers who may take the pellets, or those companies that sit within the startup lab that will be also taking pellets or filament or fibers. And it's very important to get, it's very important from the, again, from the Stephenson example, to get the economics right for this. And that will be challenging to ensure that that the different partners in this processes are at least breaking even, or else you will have vulnerabilities in the system. Again, as highlighted quite strongly, and going back to the BCE, in the context of the BCE Lab, it may be that the BCE Lab and its components become part of this central or primary hub where other players in the region feed into that hub. So it's covering the processing and the recycling, but also the product development. So getting the logistics of that was also highlighted in the Satanas example as well. And in a sense, Satanas have gone one step further than Stephenson and developed this, this test lab where products are being developed and various technical testing is going on. There's a need to get a regular volume of flow of materials, and how one manages and spreads that out is a key challenge. Partnerships will be important in developing these types of models, particularly going from the Stephenson example and also the Satanas example, that different partners need to be brought in, and particularly in the Satanas example, working with R&D players are very important, and maybe universities and testing houses to bring in new and different expertise. Particularly innovative part of the Satanas example is how they've been able to manage separate projects to deal with different parts of their concept. As we all know, it's very difficult sometimes to get funding, big funding to develop overall concepts. But what Satanas have done very well is to use project funding to fund different elements of their concept that then slot together neatly under the one heading. So just closing here, I think it was quite an important point made by Joel at Stephenson, is maybe initially you might need to think globally as to who may take your pellets or your filament or your fibers initially. Is getting that first customer. But it was very much featured in the workshop that anything the BCE Lab or BCE Hub or whatever should be developed locally with local opportunities for businesses and employment. So in the beginning, one may need to be flexible, but the idea of this is a local initiative. But the products, of course, coming out of the BCE Lab or Hub could be sold locally as well as globally. So thank you very much. Apologies for my flu, but hopefully this made, there was at least one idea that emerged from this. We'll now get into the panel discussion, and Joel from Stephenson will initially pick up the first question. So thank you very much.
Houston Harbor are really interested in participating in this. As a matter of fact, it is Fisher-led. Right now, the program at Stephenson, I was actually there yesterday speaking to some of the staff there, The program really is now Fisher-led. It's led by fishers on the ground who are employed by Stephenson Harbor Authority for the coordination for all of it. So not only do they know how to take the nets apart, they know the supply chains. They know how to get rid of all the accoutrement, whether it's steel rings or cable or chains or rubber from drag gear. They found solutions for all of that locally, which is something that probably would have taken somebody else a lot longer, but these guys know where all of these things, they know the supply chains, they know who's taking the material and for what reasons. And they found solutions for it. Even the lead line now has found a solution for it. And they're not just sending the lead line out to have somebody take the lead out of it and then throw the nylon coating around the lead away, but they want that lead line back so that they can put it back into the recycling program. So they really have taken this a step further, I think. And I think the idea of the blue circular economy, those types of that hub idea where you have that innovation hub really has the necessary building blocks here. So I think it's a good place to start. And I think what needs to be, in order for that to work, I think there needs to be a like, what is the key output that's being looked at here, right? And that will vary, and it will also need, you had a giant slide that said funding, and of course that's going to need to be a thing as well. And what is that key output going to be? Maybe it's, if it's going to be funded externally, maybe it's funded by the government, maybe it's funded by other entrepreneurs or innovators or others who are interested in investors who are interested in doing that. There needs to be that dedicated output. And maybe that's just the creation of these businesses that can use this material as an input and as a feedstock. I mean, the Ocean Legacy Foundation, which is now the recycling center within Stephenson Harbor Authority, was funded through Innovative Solutions Canada for that purpose, to create Canadian businesses. And as you mentioned, that was the whole thing. Think Global and Act Local was the whole goal of the program at the beginning, was to say, yes, this can be done. Yeah, we were shipping net to Plastics Global and to Aquafil at the time, but to prove that it could be done so that there was motivation to find a local solution, which is exactly what happened. So I think all of that makes sense, and I think it's an interesting next step to take as we start to try to look for ways to expand this program to other harbors in the region. And I know that's something that's being done in the UK and elsewhere as well. So I might just pause there and Peter, see if you have anything to add, because I've been talking quite a bit. My apologies.
Well, maybe I'll just have a sort of flow through to that. One thing that I can clarify is part of the BCE Lab Hub Innovation Lab is to produce products from the pellets, from the all the filament using 3D printing. But also, I think what's becoming clear in reviewing your case studies and thinking more broadly is there may be this separate role for selling materials itself. So the outputs might be materials as well as product. And the other just logistical issue that I realized is that I didn't record the first part of this. So I'm recording the panel discussion. So what I'll go back is to re-record the presentation and set up 2 videos that I'll share with Greg, and apologize to all for that. Too many things flying, too many plates flying around at the moment. Apologies for that. So sorry, Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Martin. And yeah, I can agree on what has been said and what we have done in Sotenäs in Sweden. We are a small municipality with a quite unique way to work with a symbiosis center that Martin showed, that we try to build collaborations to solve local, regional, national, global challenges together with different partners, both local but also national and from abroad, depending on the challenge. And we use the methodology that Martin said, industrial symbiosis, as someone's waste can become someone's raw material, and by collaborations we can get greater benefits. And we started to work in different areas, in the food sector, for example, energy sector, and after a while we looked into marine waste, as that was something we had worked with quite a lot to clean the beaches, and also we have a producer of fishing gears locally, who had also started to look into how to become more sustainable, how to produce more sustainable and selective fishing gears, and also like started to think about recycling of used fishing gears as well. And we find different collaboration, the municipality and those producer, the fishermen, but also like research organizations and other industries. And with quite small funding, we started small and created a small recycling center for marine waste, focused on fishing gears. And after a while, we saw that the solution to send it abroad, when we have like collected and sorted, then it's not possible to do it in an economical, feasible way, and it's not an environmental good way either. So we started to see how can we actually use this raw material as a resource locally. And we discussed with different entrepreneurs and actors how they can use the material for new products, because there is a consumer demand of ocean plastic. Consumers are paying more, but plastics, for example, they charge less than virgin for their plastic than virgin plastics. So the business models is not working very well. So we try to see how can we look at the raw material and see that for something else than plastic, like ocean plastic should be something else. We shouldn't compete to virgin plastic. And there were a lot of interest, but there were also a lot of questions. And with that, we got funding for a project to establish a test bed for ocean plastic, where companies can come in and use the materials for their ideas for new products. And we have collaborations with, I think, 12 different companies, a couple of research organizations, with material labs and so on. And during the project, we saw that it is a potential, and now we are trying to scale up and to solve new challenges that came up in the process as well. We see there is the consumers are asking for the material and are willing to pay, but as you say, Martin, the quality of material and the volume of the material is crucial for some of the actors.
So maybe a question for both of you, because I think one of the key difference between the two is the testbed lab, and that's because I think there's different stakeholders in this. You've got the sort of this broader symbiosis approach. There was the link between the region and wearing your other hat, the research institutes, and whereas more on the Canadian side, it was more harbour driven to start off with, as I understand it. So, but I think one of the things that is quite common to both, which is a key part, is the whole logistics side, the sort of whole primary and secondary hub aspect of this. And I wonder if you might both have a chat on this, because I saw somebody mention an issue about scaling up, but there's an issue. Almost one needs to rephrase the question slightly, and I think the primary and secondary hub is, idea as a key part of that. Do you want to start with that, Joel, and then Peter, if you want to comment?
Sure. I think in Stephenson, we were able to make the program work initially, basically cost neutral to the harbor. The issue, or we were able to get the nylon material, the PA material, PA6 specifically, or nylon 6 specifically, out of the gill net and the seine net. it had a high enough commercial value that we were able to make the program work and be self-sustaining, but we did end up with the byproduct of the polyethylene and polypropylene, which didn't have as high a commercial value. And when you start, initially when the program was created, you start shipping that material, the economic margins are razor thin, but at the time we had enough material locally within Stephenson to more or less make that work, pay the fishers for the time, the harbor staff for the time, not have to pay for the disposal of the material either buried in a landfill or whatever. But as you scale that up, you start to run into, since Stephenson is now not only the center where the net would be collected, but also the place where it would be recycled via Ocean Legacy Foundation's facility. All the material from along the coast of British Columbia, which is a pretty big place, needs to come down to there. And so again, Martin had mentioned the transportation logistics, the cost, because this is a rough coastal environment too. It's not, it's not all fair weather all the time. So it's a matter of getting that material here. The economics then break. Especially when you're dealing with all of those materials. Now, it's not just the nylon, it's also the polyethylene, the polypropylene. There is some value in some of the other stuff, the brass rings and the steel rings and things like that, but it's relatively small compared to the rest of it. The economics do become very much of a challenger. You need external sources of funding. The sale of the material itself will not cover the transportation logistics. I saw there was a question in the question panel as well about, are there challenges with shipping internationally and stuff? And the answer broadly is absolutely there are, especially now with changes to the Basel Convention, making shipping waste much more challenging. It's not impossible, but the hoops you have to jump through in order to make that happen are more profound. And I think that's another reason to just make sure that there's a local solution as much as possible. And I think that these will help drive those local solutions. But again, in order to do that, you need to make sure there's enough material for a local solution to make sense. No one's going to create a recycling plant if there's not enough material to feed it, because at the end of the day, these are businesses as well. So it's a complicated question, but I think scaling up, it's logistics and the transportation costs that are the biggest hurdle to overcome. If you can get the material to where it needs to be, that's fine, but someone needs to pay to get it there, and do all the processing as well. So there is a labor cost associated with, when I mean processing, I mean taking all of the other stuff that's not the nylon and the polyethylene or whatever off, separating all of that out, basically disassembling a net. And as Martin said, fishers are best suited to do that because they're the ones who know how to put them together. They can take them apart very easily and quickly and safely is another thing, because using really sharp knives to cut these things apart is not something you want to give to a volunteer. But anyway, just my first initial thoughts. And
Great. Peter?
Yeah, we have started a national collection system for used fishing gears, and it's funded by national agencies. So we got money in order to actually drive and collect used gears from the whole country and bring them to Sotenäs, and prepare them for recycling. And we have seen that we have set up different sub-hubs, so to say, for collection system. Of course, where it is large amount of fishing gears, and try to optimize the logistics in order to reduce the cost of transportation. But the whole system as it is today, we need external funding. As Joel said, we can't live on selling materials. It's not even close. And I think I saw one question there. Martin, will we go through the questions?
Yeah, I just got one quick short fire question for you guys after this. Maybe I'll go into that and then we can open the questions. So just, sorry, Peter, maybe I'll just go straight into this one because I think it relates also. You know, thinking about 2025, 1st of January, when EPR comes in across member states in Europe, bearing in mind the lessons learned as early movers, both of you guys, what do you think the key two gaps that needs to be filled? For me, I'm hearing funding, challenges. I'm also thinking about the right stakeholders. At the moment, the recyclers are limited, in most countries, and therefore the value chains aren't well constructed. So what are one or two key things you think that needs to be fixed, or may even still be issues come 1st of January when EPR comes in? Who wants to pick that up?
I can start with one thing that is, we need to create producer organizations. There are not in place, as you said, Martin, and they are the one that's going to pay for the system. So the rest is solvable. It will be expensive in the beginning if they are not prepared, and that will be a challenge. But yeah, I think that's the first thing, and then the rest will be easier because then you have money in the system.
Joe, thoughts?
Yeah. So I think with EPR, I mean, EPR is a great way to potentially fund essentially what we're talking about here, as opposed to it being downloaded directly onto the fishers. There are some challenges, obviously, with what does EPR look like, and we're talking about all EU member states having to create their own EPR system under the legislation. So it won't necessarily be uniform. They might look a little bit different, and there might be some challenges that arise out of that. I think another key thing to consider is that you can do all the recycling in the world, but you need a market for the end product in order for it to be we've seen that before, where people had a really great idea and they were using some of this material to make a really good product, but because they had to charge quite a premium over what you would otherwise have to if there was product alternatives, sometimes it doesn't take off. You really do need to have that end market for the product that you're creating, even if it's just the pellets, or if it's an actual product that you're using to making out of those pellets. And I think that it's such a key thing, and I think in certain places that it didn't unfold as we had hoped, it's just such a key piece of it, because you can fund a recycling program, you can recycle a whole bunch of material, but at the end of the day, if no one's buying those pellets and no one's making anything out of it, it's not going to be successful. And I think, Martin, that's where the production of actual things out of that material, as part of that BCE model that you talked about, is so crucial.
Great. Well, thanks both for the comments there. Do we have some questions here? Rosa, if you're on the line and you've been able to scan some of those questions? Or if not, I will take them from the top. So we have Laura here saying, is most recycling focused on monomers, or has there been success with copolymer recycling polysteel?
Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Well, yeah, the monomers is much easier to recycle. There are some mix that is possible to recycle as well, some polymer mix, but that's something we want to see in the future, that we mix as little as possible from the recycling point of view.
Am I right? I'll pronounce it wrong, but and I'm not sure if it's just a European thing. Is it Dyneema, this rope that's including metal and plastic? Is that becoming increasingly used, and are there solutions emerging for that?
I think it's more used in ship. Oh, sorry, Peter. There's a bit of a delay.
No, well, today either it goes for reuse in some way, or today it goes to metal recycling, and the plastics is used as fuel in that process. So it's not the best, but that's how we do it, at least today.
Right. Another question from Laura. Are consumers part of the collaboration system? Is there a marketing arm of the collaboration? Will a higher price for the product help support the process? So I think just, cutting through that is what is the role for consumers as well as citizens in sort of local stakeholder systems? Any comments there?
I think there has to be a demand for the product, right? And the consumers are going to be the one that create that. And a higher price, like I said, The higher price is going to help offset the costs of basically using this end-of-life material, because virgin material, once it's created, you just use it. This stuff, you need to process it, you need to ship it, you need to do, well, I suppose you need to ship virgin material too, but there's a much more complex avenue to get from what the fishing gear is to what the plastic pellet is, as opposed to producing virgin material, and there has to be some cost involved in that. So consumers, I think, need to create the demand to have this material in products, whether it's entirely made of it or whether we're talking about recycled content. It's a similar type of a thing.
Yeah.
And I think also the other aspect, particularly to do with the sort of fishing gear, ocean marine plastics, is, you know, a variety of interested NGOs in the area, beach cleaners. So you've got particular types of citizens. You've got divers who are all concerned about these issues that make it a sort of particularly different sort of system. And people who want to deal with the problem and come up with solutions. So tackling up stakeholder engagement, you actually have to think more broadly than a normal one for other sectors. Because my experience from the stakeholder meetings we set up. I know there's a few more questions here. There's from Anonymous. I hope it isn't the hackers, or maybe it could be. Are there any legislative challenges to ship the local fishing gear globally, i.e. shipping the waste across borders?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on that earlier. That's the question that I was referring to when I mentioned, is that the changes to the Basel Convention in particular have made that more difficult, because you know, once there's been an increased global awareness on countries, primarily Western countries, shipping waste to parts of the global South, and that being obviously a challenge for those places. And the adjustments to the Basel Convention were, I think, largely in reaction to that, which makes it more difficult to ship what is considered end-of-life or waste product around. It's not impossible; it just makes it more difficult. So I would say yes. Now there are, yep. And I'm hoping that encourages the creation of new localized recycling centers or you know, repurposing opportunities wherever you are in the world.
Yeah.
There's a comment from Sea Trust, and I'm not sure if this is a statement or a comment, but please feel free to comment, guys. Melting points is how we sort polypropylene and polyethylene. The rest is fairly simple.
Yeah, I think that was a question that I answered by text, how we do it in Sweetness before, so it's been answered, how we sort different polymers. And yeah, we use some equipment for that in the recycling center, so we make quick analysis.
Okay. Peter mentioned you'd want ocean plastics to be cheaper than virgin. Why would you not want to try and compete with virgin plastics? If ocean plastics become cheaper than virgin, wouldn't the problem solve itself? So price issue.
Yeah, and maybe I said something wrong. I want this plastic to be much more expensive than virgin plastic, because yeah, it has a history, and you buy something else than just plastics. So yeah, but today, for example, plastics, they struggle to have a higher price on their products than virgin plastic, and that will not work. As you well said, the process is much more expensive than to produce virgin plastics. So we need to have a higher price.
I mean, I think what the question is asking is, in an ideal world, if they were cheaper, wouldn't that just solve the virgin product? And I think the answer is yes, but it's just not practical. It's just not going to, not without heavy subsidies. Would you ever see something like that? And the other thing to consider is that usually, depending on the material, ocean plastic tends to be not as strong, not as, you know, it loses some of that in the exposure to the elements and things like that. So it's not as high quality a material in some cases, which is why there's a lot of push for recycled content where you can still maintain the same quality of the product. So there's those types of elements at play as well.
Okay, would you say that producers of fishing gear also need to fund and provide recycling facilities, or should local authorities provide the recycling? So, and this is from Pine.
I think when the EPR will kick in, and then the producers need to set up or pay for the service. But I think the local authorities should support the development, because we are far from there at the moment, and it's a lot to do before it kicks in as well. So work together in collaborations. That's my...
Yeah, and I think just while Joel's thinking a comment on this, is that in that European context, I mean, absolutely, you know, the responsibility will fall squarely on the producers and the assemblers, those that place the products on the market, you know, the other distributors as well. So this goes back to your former point about the need to set up producer organizations. And it's really quite a surprise to me that those haven't been set up on a national basis, and sort of reiterating the compare and contrast to automotive, electronics and packaging, where we have producer responsibility in Europe. You know, the very different thing there is when when the legislation came in there, you had different, let's say, producer bodies that had their own environmental committees, where they discuss sort of cross-cutting issues that, you know, cross competitive issues. In this sector, there isn't those sort of fora. So for me, you know, the fact that the producers are not organized is a real, you know, key issue. I don't know, is there anything organized like that in Canada, Joe, of the gear manufacturers and assemblers?
Not that I'm aware of. It doesn't mean no, but not that I'm aware of. I do think that if we're talking about EPR, in my mind, speaking as someone who's outside of Europe, acknowledged, but who's been participating in the process, I think that EPR should cover whatever's needed to get the material collected and recycled at the end of the day. So if that's port reception facilities, if that's transportation logistics, if that's recycling facilities, I think that would all come under the umbrella. So whatever that pool of money under EPR, those are some of the things that will probably be funded out of it. But that's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's, and I'm not down in the devil in the detail on this, is I guess there will be guidance for different stakeholders in the process. At the moment, it's highlighted central government's role and producers' role, but obviously there's, you know, harbours, ports that are individual organisations, there are local authorities, and all these will be key players, you know, key organisations that will need to be part of a system at a local level. And that's, again, the big difference with the other EPR. You know, let's say the problem, the solution is very much localized, if I can say the word, localized around coastal areas where the issues with electronics and automotive and packaging, you know, products can come to their end of life anywhere in a country. So there's a lot of peculiarities to do with this system that I think haven't necessarily been fully considered, at least when it was brought in. I think we have a couple more questions if everybody's okay to stay on for a little bit longer. Yep. Can you speak to Bureau's success and recent shift to the business model? I don't know, Joel, if you're close to Ben on the latest developments. I mean, I've had a recent chat with him about a month or two ago.
You've actually spoken to him more recently than I have, particularly about this. I think it's just I don't want to speak for Ben and I don't want to speak for Bce, so I'm going to be pretty vague on it, but I just think it's, as you had mentioned, Martin, I think you put it best when you said it's just the changing nature of the business model changing nature of the sort of the general situation around all of this and the opportunities that come with it. As a program like that expands, then you follow the opportunities where they are. And I think that Bce is broadly doing the same work that they were doing before, but they're expanding what they're able to do. I think at the end of the day, it's good for everyone to just demonstrate that there is a value in this material and that a successful business model can be derived from it. But again, I don't want to speak for Bce, so I don't think I'll go into more detail about that.
Me on a similar basis, I'll just add, I'll add my observation, but please check directly with Ben and Bce on this. But I think the interesting thing that they were starting to supply pellets alongside the products to, I think, particularly an office equipment, an office chair company. But obviously, I think probably over the last 3 or so years, they've seen more growth in the demand for the pellets. And they've probably simply seen a business opportunity, you know, with coming up with more of a streamlined approach, perhaps, as I understand it, more licensing the products or getting, you know, well, so I think it's down to the market changing as well, more demand, the fact that they've built up a huge amount of knowledge about how to do this. And I think they've had a lot of visibility. So I imagine they do it because they see a good, strong business and environmental case, because sustainability is part of their core mission. But so I'll shut up there on that, and please research them on their website. They have a lot of useful information there. Laura again, sorry, I mean fish. Sorry, it sounds like a quite abstract joke there. So a Monty Python joke. I'll go on to Tommaso. Could you please comment on the Fishing for Energy initiative? I've not heard of that initiative. Has anybody? Yep.
Yeah, it's a waste to energy facility, so it's basically incineration of the material in order to recapture that energy to power local homes. And I mean, I think there are challenges with emissions and those types of things as well. So it depends on what we mean by sustainable. And the same thing could be said about recycling, and the same thing can be said about all kinds of things, in that there are other elements to it. Even if you're talking about transportation costs, what is the carbon footprint of all of that, right? So there's a much larger equation to be said here. So I'm going to refrain from commenting on that particular program in particular. I know that it has been used to good effect, particularly where you have materials that are very difficult or impossible to separate, so you can't recycle them. If you end up with a giant ball of net and cable and rope and, you know, metal pots or whatever it is, then the labor to separate that out becomes, if it's even possible to do so, is just untenable. So I think that's primarily where those types of solutions are used.
Peter?
In Sotenäs, we send the material that can't be recycled to a close by incineration plant. But yeah, we try to avoid as much as possible, but some material is too contaminated or too hard to separate, as you said, Joel, and then we have to send it for incineration. But there is also challenges for the incineration plants. You can't send in a big trawl, for example, to the plant, because they are not handling these big chunks of plastics, and like the big claws they can stick to the nets, and then it starts to burn everywhere. So they are not willing to take it either. But if we do some separation into smaller parts, they can actually take it. But otherwise, they say no as well to big gears.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm not familiar with initiatives mentioned either.
Yeah, I think there's just a couple of questions, but I'd just make a comment there in that many of us sitting in the circular economy discussions wouldn't consider waste to energy part of the circular economy. It would be outside of scope and a separate conversation. So I think that wouldn't be something, for example, that could be funded out of a circular economy funding initiative, for example. So I think a couple more questions. Have you included beach clean rubbish in your, maybe that's plants? We have found that beach clean plastic is cleaner, and NGOs are happy to sort it. So, you know, content from beach cleans.
We do it a bit in Sotenäs, big pieces. The small rubbish is very hard to separate and to analyze what kind of material and so on, and the quality of the plastic can be very poor. But like big fishing, what do you call it? Big pieces of plastic. We actually collect
macroplastic, is it?
Yeah, macro. Yeah, that's another definition
Yeah.
to discuss. But yeah, big pieces. And so it's possible to actually know what kind of material it is as well. And yeah, it's a matter of costs and how much work to put into recycling a few kilos. So it depends on the materials. But we see that the demand of that is maybe bigger than fishing gears in one way, that people are willing to pay for cleanup initiatives rather than recycling initiatives in consumer products. So if I buy a watch made of ocean plastic, I pay more if it's, yeah, it gives money back to cleaning rather than to pick up used gear from some big fishing company.
I think Ocean Legacy here in Canada is doing both. So they're collecting beach clean material from up and down the coast of British Columbia as well as fishing gear. So they are right from the get-go trying to do both. So broadly, yeah, I think it can be, but you need different equipment a lot of the time in order to do that. And as Peter pointed out, there's challenges with sorting and the quality of the material. And are you going to be putting that both through the same feedstock? Probably not. So I think they're going to be doing two separate lines for that. But yes, they are taking material from beach cleans as well.
So I think Pine made a comment there that EPR is coming in at least in Europe, slated to come in 1st of Jan, in effect 2025, but stuff needs to start happening now to fill the gaps. And I wondered if you guys had any comments on that.
My experience, because there was talk about there was an exploration of EPR for fishing gear here in British Columbia. The British Columbian government did a study on that and reached out to some stakeholders. And at the end of the day, they will be introducing EPR for several things. And then fishing gear was one of the ones that was included, identified in one of their stakeholder outreach campaigns that they had done. I don't think that that's on the table for them right now. And I think the reason is, and I think this may be true of others as well, although I can't say for sure, but anecdotally, this is what I'm hearing, is that people are kind of waiting to see what this looks like because in the year, British Columbian government was looking at just doing it for the sake of doing it, whereas it's legislated under the EU, which means everyone has to do it, whether they like it or not. And I think that people are looking to see what the lessons are learned from that, because it's going to happen before they go too far down that path on their own. And I agree that it would be great to have something between now and then. That's not to say nothing will be in place, but I think the driver for that is most places are going to be looking to the EU to see what happens there, what are the lessons learned, what are the pitfalls before they go too far down that path. But that's just my impression.
Yeah, and I totally agree that we need to start before, and that's what we have tried to do in Sotenäs. And now we had some national agencies with us, so they also see that we need to be prepared. We need to have like the system and the facilities, otherwise we don't have a chance nationally to actually fulfill the EPR. So they are supporting us quite a lot, both with actual work and connections, but also financially. And we have different projects funded by the agencies because of preparing. And yeah, I think other countries will benefit of doing that as well, because yeah, someone needs to pay, and from the start, to start from scratch, it's quite expensive, and the material will not pay for the development at the moment.
So, I mean, my observation would be from both your comments is looking back to particularly the electronics EPR is absolutely, as you said, Joel, what you saw is once the so-called WE directive was published, you saw Korea WE, you saw, you know, XYZ WE in different parts of the world, you saw different US states, for example, developing their own equivalent EPR for electronics. So I would see, you know, that Europe learning the lessons, you know, for others happening, but also I think there's going to be a 2, maybe 3-tier process in Europe, where you've got advanced countries like Sweden, you know, pushing ahead with all the knowledge here, which for us seems to be, the Sotanas knowledge seems to be quite far in advance of others. So I think there's going to be probably a lot of laggards, you know, in the 27, 28 countries. Some maybe haven't even started their first stakeholder engagement workshops even. I know some countries have, because that's the first part of the process, getting people talking to one another in the local areas where the nets come to the end of life, for example. So I think there's some process work that needs to start throughout, even before you've set up physical facilities. But maybe for time, if you guys just had 1 or 2 final comments to close off, is there anything particularly you wanted to make? Any particular comments or reports or anything that are emerging from your operations, or give it to you guys for the last word.
Just for me, I think, and Martin, you do a good job of outlining this in the BCE report, is just that collaboration is absolutely key to this. You're not going to get anywhere without involving all of the necessary stakeholders. And fishers have been mentioned as one who absolutely needs to be engaged as a stakeholder, and I think that needs to continue. But not just them, but also, you know, technology innovators and investors and recycling companies and all the different elements of it need to come into play. This is not something that anyone can just do on their own. It's certainly not something Stephenson decided to do on their own. It was something they started and then brought a whole bunch of people into the sphere to create something that's lasting. And it's not just going to be sort of a one-off to get rid of some material. And I think that again, like with all things that generally all things that are worth doing, collaboration is absolutely key, and this is no different.
Thank you for stealing my comment.
Sorry, Peter.
But another thing is I think you can start quite small. In Sotanas, we started small and we built it step by step, and we included more and more things in the work for a cleaner ocean and recycling of ocean plastics. So start small if you can and let it grow from there. You doesn't need to build a facility and then start. So you can start, yeah, quite simple. And it's better to do something than nothing.
So just to close off, start, firstly, start on something. You can start small and learn lessons. Identify the stakeholders in the sort of port city areas and engage them and look at collaborative solutions. The key issues around the funding, yet not necessarily fully resolved at the moment. Issues there to do with also these producer organizations, and the producers and assemblers really need to get together, because they are going to be some of the key players in EPR wherever it comes in the world. And if they don't have a common perspective, this is going to get quite messy, I would say. So I think I guess we're not producers, so we can't tell them what to do, but I mean it would seem a sensible strategy. And I think on a positive, there is seemingly, on a more broader level, there is this agreements on ocean plastics overall. So this is fitting within a broader change that's going on within sort of G20 countries particularly. So I think there are going to be innovation and entrepreneurial opportunities for those that, if we go back to the beginning, start now. So thank you very much, Joel and Peter, for your engagement in this and for staying on to pick up the questions. And thank everybody very much for your active engagement and questions. And I will circulate the 2 videos, and apologies for that, and we'll pass on the emails of Joel and Peter when we put the videos out. So again, thank you all very much, and and have a good evening wherever you are, or a good rest of the day, or etc. etc. Right. Bye. Thanks everybody. Cheers.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.